Welcome to Talking with Tech. My name is Chris Boudet, and I'm here with Rachel Nadel. How's it going, Rachel?
I've been better, Chris.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What's wrong? Listeners, you can't see what she just did, but she just put up her hand. There's a big bandage around your hand. What's up?
You will not believe what I did, Chris. So this was actually last week. This is like a week ago at this point. I was on my bed and I was lazily trying to open my window with one hand. I thought I could lay on my bed and push my window open. And I was pushing on the window and my hand smashed through the glass window. And I got this really terrible cut on my hand.
Like stitches?
So the crazy thing is they weren't able to stitch it because of the way that it was cut. It was not a clean cut. And so we just had to I had to put this compression bandage on it to stop the bleeding. And it was really, really intense. My window was smashed all over my floor and my bed. There was blood everywhere. It was crazy.
Oh my gosh. It's like a horror movie.
That's what it felt like.
Or maybe the Hulk, you smashed right through that window.
Exactly. I was I've been going to the gym lately. Wow, I'm so strong.
Rachel Smash.
Exactly. That should be my middle name now. Rachel Smash Madel. Oh.
Well, I'm glad it's okay and it's healing up, right? I mean, is it feeling okay?
It is. You know what's been really crazy, Chris? Because everyone has been oh my gosh, that's so terrible. And it is. It's not been fun or easy, and it's been very painful. But I will say, I have had so much gratitude this last week because this is temporary. This is something that eventually my hand will heal and I'll be able to use it again. I've been doing everything with one hand, opening my water bottle has been a challenge. All these things you don't even think about. And so what it's really made me think is we work with so many kids who have challenges like this all the time, every day, and it's permanent, right? And it's hard. My life has been hard the last week. I haven't been able to type emails. I've just my life has kind of been turned upside down because I only have one hand that's viable to use. And I don't know, it's just brought me a lot of gratitude and a lot of, understanding of what the kids that we work with sometimes, what they go through. And so as bad of an experience as it's also been a really great experience.
Yeah, I know what you mean. We take a lot for granted in our lives. And then when something is temporarily taken away, that is a great reminder to appreciate all the stuff that we do take for granted.
Exactly. I take for granted the fact that I can open my water bottle with two hands.
Yeah, really. I'm seeing you kind of cradle that hand right now and not really use it. It's just kind of there.
Mm-mm.
Can you move your fingers back?
I can. Luckily now I can move my fingers, but it was hard, especially the first few days. It was so painful. It was still bleeding because I couldn't stitch it. And so it was just man, it was rough. Luckily now it's been healing. I've been kind of resting and taking it easy and eating lots of vegetables.
Well, while you were getting your hand sliced open and going over to the hospital to have them check it out, I've had kind of an incredible experience this last week. We had Matt Baud and Jill Senner come out to our neck of the woods and kind of do coaching with us for partner augmented input or aided language stimulation or modeling, if you just want to call it that. And then the whole coaching aspect, how to help other people become better at modeling. And it was just a great experience. We have had them on the podcast before. I know you met them at ASHA. I had never met them face to face. So that was, it was great to just kind of powwow and brainstorm and compare notes. And like I said, one of the best parts of the entire experience was really focusing in on the coaching, which is how to help other people learn how to do what we do. It's a whole set of skills is to help someone use a communication device. And it's a whole nother set of skills is to help someone else use a communication device, if that makes sense.
That's amazing. I love Jill and Matt. They are AAC rock stars in my book. And I'm so jealous that I wasn't able to be there with you learning from them because they're fantastic. And they have so many great strategies and ideas about how to coach communication partners, which is just really amazing because like you said, it's one thing to know kind of what to do yourself. It's another can of worms to figure out how to teach that to teachers and other SLPs and parents and all of the people that interface with the children that we're working with. It's really important. It's such a huge piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, one of the big things that they had said, maybe a takeaway of mine, which I kind of knew, but it kind of recentered it for me, was the use of common vocabulary. So, they're sort of famous in the world of AAC for the concept of s'mores or the acronym of s'mores. And one of the reasons they use those terms is that this way everyone uses the same words, so that when you're coaching, you can say, oh, that was an awesome expansion you just did there. Or, oh, I really see how you respected and reflected. Or, I really see how you're modeling, right? I don't know if I should go through s'mores again because we have a whole episode on it, but it's this mnemonic that helps you remember these different skills that you should be using when you're trying to implement a communication device with somebody. But just having that shared language was just, it's a good reminder, it's a good secret code that we can have together as a coach and as a person who's learning, so that we can just be on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. And also what I love about it is that it's very target specific, right? Instead of just saying, oh, that was great, really going into detail. I mean, we tell this to, new grads and new clinicians all the time, give target specific feedback. It's super important when you're teaching communication partners too. What exactly was so great about that? So I think that's one of the values of that too.
As a matter of fact, they presented some research on that as well in their training. They just said, there's some research that suggests if you give kind of just positive feedback, good job, oh, I like that it's not as meaningful as giving that specific feedback. Okay, try going a little bit slower, or tell me about how you felt about that experience that you just had. Those kind of coaching words that you use, that mentality, the phrases that you use really make a difference.
They really do. The other thing I like about the work that they do is it encourages self-discovery, I think, with communication partners. It's not like, here's what to do. I'm going to tell you what to do. You figure it out after I tell you what to do. It's more like, what could have been different about that? Kind of knowing the framework of everything we've discussed. There's a lot of self-reflection involved, which is how we ultimately learn, right? And how we're ultimately empowered to learn. Okay, I saw this, and here are the things that I maybe could have done different. That's so much better than anybody ever telling you what you could have done different.
Yes. Oh, so much so. That reflection at the end. Absolutely. One of the other things that they, again, kind of solidified for me is in that s'mores acronym, the MO for that is model, right? Which, of course, if you listen to this podcast more than 5 minutes, you've heard us say the word model. And what they did is they kind of broke it down into two different ways of looking at modeling. Meaning that you could be describing what the student's doing. And so you're modeling on the device and you're describing that, what you see the student doing. If you're modeling on the student's device, you might say, I put in because the student just put something in, or I ate it because the student ate something. And they called that parallel talk. And then self-talk would be another form of modeling where, again, you're pressing on the student's device, but the self-talk is describing what you're doing. So I put in my mouth, and I, as the communication partner, puts the thing in their mouth. Or I color it, and you pick up the crayon and you start coloring. Something like that is that there are two different types of descriptive teaching: this parallel talk and self-talk. And it was just, again, I do that naturally, but I'm not sure that I was coaching it explicitly to other people and breaking it down into those two different forms. And that kind of stuff, it just brought it back to light for me.
Yeah. And I think that's an important distinction that a lot of communication partners sometimes have challenges with, especially the idea that we can totally model without expectation of having a child say anything, right? A lot of people, it's hard for them to wrap their heads around that because they're so used to requiring a response, having an outcome, this outcome-based mentality of well, I said put it in, so I want him to say it now, And so I think that it's really important to teach. We can just do self-talk. We can just give that language input. We know AAC is a visual language, and we need to give that visual input for students. And so we would do it the same way that we would do it with a typically developing kid who was hearing language all day. We're constantly doing self-talk with babies and toddlers. And so it's just really important that we do that for our AAC learners.
Yeah. You know who else is visual learners? The adults. So another little strategy they had, and this one, they had a little poster from Rachel that they gave away, the Inspire, Don't Require, right? The idea was that you could put visuals up in the room. And I had done this before. Again, we had put large core boards up in a room, but really the mnemonics, put those up in the room, and little reminders like Inspire, Don't Require. have posters and put those up in your room as reminders for all the staff about what we're trying to do.
Yeah, actually, what's funny is we're working on right now. My team is helping me build posters like that because I feel like I have right now, there's a school I go to. It's a school for complex communication needs. And I have that right in the middle of our bulletin board. But I think it's important. Like these reminders are important. I love, these kind of inspirational messages that you just kind of glance over and see. And then it like kind of gives you a breath of fresh air to, remind you, okay, this is what I should be doing. And I tell clinicians this all the time. I need the reminders too. I'm not, this person who just goes into every, clinical situation and remembering all the things to do. It's something that I need to constantly be reminding myself of. And there's no better way than just kind of catching a glance of an inspirational quote or inspirational message or an acronym that you should be, striving to follow. So I'll keep you guys posted on when that's going to release because who knows when it's going to be, but hopefully it'll be soon. It'll definitely be before the school year starts.
One of the things that I talk about in the new assistive tech, Make Learning Awesome for All, is this concept of the rule of 22, meaning you have to hear or see or experience something 22 times before you use it, before you adopt it as your own. And I feel like putting those posters up in the wall are little drops in the bucket towards your number of 22, You might like wrap your brain around it, or maybe even not, okay, that's cool. It rhymes. I'm not really sure what it means, but 22 times with the poster up in the wall or other people saying it, it really becomes just part of who you are and what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really excited actually. So I have an article coming out in USAC's blogs, the Speak Up blog. Jill actually reached out to me and was like, would you write an article? So it's all about inspire, don't require, and how it can really help transform your practice. And instead of requiring language from kids, like how can we actually shift the table, put the onus on us to then figure out ways that we can inspire. When people are inspired, they're excited. They're excited to communicate. And so I'm really excited for that to come out. I think it'll be out in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to share it. It sounds like it's going to be great. Now, I'm not that I'm required to read it. Well, I can't wait to read your article. Not that I'm required to, but you've inspired me to.
Well, I'm happy I could do that for you, Chris. So this week's episode, I'm really excited because we're airing the second part of the Special Apps Update course that we did through Exceptional Ed. And so if you listen to this week's episode and you listen to last week's episode, you will then be able to go to exceptionaled.com and you'll be able to take the quiz and earn a CEU, an hour-long CEU. So we're really passionate about bringing the podcast to professional development, and you can listen to our podcast now and you can earn CEUs for that. So Chris, how can people find all of these CEU courses we're doing?
Well, we've decided to make it easy for you listeners. We put everything in one place. If you go to bit.ly/techCEU, you can find hyperlinks to everything, including the CEUs that we've been talking about in the previous episodes and this episode. So once you're done with that, head over to the Facebook group and leave us a message about the experience. Let us know how it was. Did you enjoy listening to the podcast and then taking the quiz and getting the CEUs? Let us know how that worked out for you. So without further ado, let's listen to the second half of the Special Apps Update from 2018.
Hi, I'm Matt Hott, one of the hosts of Speech Science, a weekly podcast bringing you all the information that you can handle related to speech sciences and disabilities. Michelle Wintering, Michael McLeod, and I interview leaders and difference makers in the field. Every Tuesday, we drop a new episode. You can find us on iTunes, Android, and on our website, www.speechscience.org/Speech Science Podcast. Join us as we try to find the answers to the question,
what is communication?
The next one is about the features that are essential for all AAC apps. So what would you feel are features that are essential for use with clients with special needs? So like, for example, guided access, accessibility, switch access, things like that.
I think I'm going to take a stab. Core words. And anybody who does stuff with AAC knows about the power of core words. We just did a podcast on it, and it was really good for beginners if you don't know a lot about core words. But we need to be able to support generative language. And I think a lot of times we get stuck early on with kids who are nonverbal and nouns. I see a lot of teachers in classrooms, and they are stuck with just like, he wants crackers and he likes the ball and the train. But the problem with nouns is, where do you go? Where do you go with nouns? How do you build sentences with only nouns? Mm-hmm. Spoiler alert, you can't. You need verbs and adjectives and all of these things. That's what core words support us with. So when you're looking at a device, we really need to make sure that it has adequate access to core words. Chris?
Yeah, so I would add that one of the features that I look at is, it's weird because we phrase the question as features for apps, but really it's what do you need for successful communication and language. And so aided language stimulation is the second one. Core words is the philosophy for where the words are and which words you choose. The next one would be, well, how do you teach somebody to use those words? Well, you have to model on the device. So some of the features that I think are really, really cool and slick is if you can actually have two devices, you can be modeling on one and it actually appears on the other, or, where some people will use a laser pointer, or you could actually just touch the other person's device. But the technology might have solutions that are continuing, and that is not something universal with all the apps yet. That is a big component. And then the other thing that I think would be so awesome to have, and some have them and not all do, is the data collection component in the background. So that you could take the data of what this person's actually saying and analyze it and have nice graphs and charts, or take that data and look at it and make some clinical decisions about it without having to do the heavy legwork that the speech therapists know all and well of figuring out the MLU and taking a language sample and analyzing it. And all of that saying with either parent permission or student permission, because you're collecting, I don't want someone writing down everything I say, every minute. So as long as people are cool with it.
Well, you guys have hit on some great stuff. I mean, it's tough. And Chris, you totally just hit on it, but especially coming out of the development background, when I think of essential features, it almost becomes this like shopping list for me, where I'm like, this is like the idealized form, right? And reality is, and any developers watching, no offense, but every system is sort of uniquely flawed, right? There isn't like a single one that's perfect for every situation. I'm really glad to see people incorporating more data collection. I think that's something that's absolutely invaluable to the, sort of ongoing assessment process, because assessment never ends, right? Always have to be thinking about the decisions you've made. So that's huge. Obviously, aided language stimulation is part of the sort of broader circle of support around the app and the student. And then core words. On our podcast, we recently did a whole hour on core words specifically. And now I see so many apps talk about how they have a core word program that I almost want an app to advertise that they don't. Like that, like a Mad Libs style thing. Like you don't get the 300 most frequent words. I'm joking, obviously, but that's something that I think is, obviously like really critical to anything that we would call like a robust communication device. And robust being something that really, has these essential features, but also is able to sort of grow with the student over time.
I'm gonna throw one more in there, Lucas and Rachel. Yeah, that is, I think it's becoming more and more essential to consider where the icons are located, where the vocabulary is located, and keeping that relatively consistent. So I think motor planning, motor access, all of that either for rate enhancement or just for learning where things are in the first place. I think that there's research to support it, and the more apps are moving in that direction, where we don't just move things all over the place, because it makes it harder to refine where everything is. It'd be like switching the S and Q on my keyboard. You'd be so angry at me if I did that to you, because you keep switching things up.
I have one more to add. Keyboard with word prediction in an ideal world. Just because we want to be able to give children and adults the tools to create whatever they want to create. And whenever I'm presenting, I give an example of this little boy that I work with who is obsessed with pipe cleaners, and he makes pipe cleaner people, and he names them the most obscure, nonsensical names like Sige and Biff and all of these weird names. And if he didn't have a keyboard, he would never be able to do that. Every time I see him, he has a new pipe cleaner person with a new name. And, it just reminds me that having a keyboard is very, very important, not only from a literacy perspective, but also, we can't possibly program every single word that a child or adult might need to say. So I think that's another thing that is essential, in my opinion.
Thank you, Rachel. I love that. And it reminds us that we are working with individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Can I throw in one more? Or are we ready to?
Okay, one more and then you're done.
Okay, I was just going to say, in the absence of universal design, which is what we really want to get to, then at least being up to spec with the current standards of the OS. So like being able to support switches on an iPad, those sorts of things that already are built into the operating system. And on that note, just pragmatically, I do look into the companies and make sure that I feel like they're going to be around in 2 years, because sometimes they do pop up and go away. And that's a bummer when you set someone up with a language system and then it's not, updated.
Good points. Okay, so this one is also a really big question. What are the best practice for integrating the AAC apps into your practice? And I know, Rachel, you just did a beautiful job with your 10 cardinal rules on the podcast, so I'm putting a little plug in for that. But I would love to get a few points here of what are the best ways to sit with someone, work with them with AAC apps specifically.
Yeah. So, I think the biggest one is the device needs to be everywhere all the time and be used all the time, which is easier said than done. But I think that we really need to support the training of caregivers. I think that's the single most important thing that we can do. It feels like a lot of our energy goes into the assessment process, but not as much sometimes is spent at the implementation level. And we really need to be using these devices and be showing kids through aided language stimulation how to use these devices. And so I talk a lot about caregiver training because it's so important, finding things that are really motivating to a specific parent. I give an example of, I started with a little girl and mom was so dead set on having her say hello and goodbye to everybody she met. She had no functional language, but mom was like, she needs to say hi. She needs to say bye. So that's where I started. And it's not where I wanted to start. It wasn't the best place I felt like for starting because I wanted her to get her needs met. But, sure enough, after she started saying hello and goodbye, mom was thrilled. And, now mom trusts me. And now mom is willing to, kind of put the time and effort in because she sees a success in an area where she was really motivated to see, her child learn and grow. So I think it's really important when you're working with caregivers to find something that's really motivating to them and really meaningful to them as a way to inspire them and empower them because it's a lot of work. Aided language stimulation is work, but it's the only way that kids will learn their systems. So that's the biggest one for me. There's a ton of things. We could have 2 more hours on best practices, but that's the biggest one.
For me, I'm going to jump in and say, I agree. It's totally spending time. Everyone thinks it's about selecting the right device, and really it's working with the people who are going to be using that device. But what I found is often when I'm working with caregivers and working with teachers and paraprofessionals that are working with the students is I want to jump in with the language. I want to jump in and start teaching them how to use the device and the technical aspects of the device and teaching them, here's how you do the modeling. But so often it's getting them in the right frame of mind. And that's that presuming competence. We've mentioned it now a couple of times that the whole point of all of this is to help someone become someone who generates language and can communicate anything they want to say, whenever they want to say it, however they want to say it. And so often that perception is missing in people. They don't realize that's sort of the end game. And so I've started to really spend more time hitting let's not restrict people. There's a whole article out there and people have referenced it and written, expounded on it called The Least Dangerous Assumption. So let's start with these least dangerous assumption with somebody and not assume that they can't learn it or that they're getting all their needs met so that they're totally satisfied and happy. Let's assume that if we gave them the right tools with enough time and the right teaching, that they could get to that end goal of saying whatever they want to say.
You guys took a bunch of the good ones here. What do I say? So I see Kristen Powell wrote in the chat here an AAC implementation plan. I want to add that too. Have a plan, just have a plan that it's more than just that snapshot of that moment, right? That we're talking about setting someone up for communication for the next, potentially 5 or more years of their life, depending on, insurance model and whatever else. It's a whole nother conversation, but having a strategy for intervention is critical. Hopefully everyone here would know that by now, but it has to be said. Model. That's the big predictors that we know from research are training of circle of support and modeling, aided language stimulation, those 2 things. But to find that sort of zone of proximal development, right? To find that next step of the communicative profile of the child and then facilitate that. That's how you'll see consistent growth. And like Rachel said, though, there's a lot of this. If you have more thoughts, I see people are putting some great questions in there, and so we're going to try to get as many of those as possible after this. But also do feel free to contact us, and I know we'll talk about it at the end.
I have one more to add. Is that okay? I think that it's often overlooked is operational competence. So, we kind of give these kids these devices, but we don't infuse in our teaching how to take care of the device, how to plug it in when it's about to die, and how to turn the volume up if nobody can hear it. I can't tell you how many kids I have who are using voice output systems and they're hitting buttons and it's not, the volume's not on. So I can't hear it. So I'm like, huh, what? So I'm doing like really, exaggerated facial expressions and, gestural cues. But, we really need to make sure that we're teaching kids how to take care of these devices, and I think that that's something that will support them long-term in self-advocacy.
Excellent. Are we ready to go to the next? I don't want to.
Yes.
Okay. So the last question is, again, controversial. What would you say are apps that you would recommend to include in a comprehensive AAC evaluation? I know we all have so many apps available, but if we had, these are the 3, these are the 5, what would you say? I have some windows open here, so as you mentioned them, I'm going to be showing them.
Everybody pauses and thinks, Well, because you're right, mainly. I mean, there are so many of them, right? And we're at a point now where we do have a lot of systems that I would consider to be pretty robust. So it can be hard to decide. And I guess what I would say about that is that it is on you as a clinician in many ways. And it stinks, I know, because nobody has any time. But it is on you to educate yourself or to reach out to some of these companies, take a webinar. I mean, you're already here doing this. I mean, that's great. To find out these things, because what I don't want to see happen, which I do see happen, is a school or an area will end up being pretty much just serving one app to everyone, right? Because that's what they're familiar with, and there isn't really a one size fits all approach. But to think off the top of my head, some of the big ones that we know are created by companies that are currently big and robust and doing development. Proloquo to Go already came up, so that's certainly one. We talked about this a little bit ahead of time, and so we also had thought of LAMP, for example. Again, language acquisition by motor planning. Tobii Dynavox makes an app called Compass, and as well as a new one called Snap Plus Core, which are for very different audiences, but I think are both fantastic in the right setting. I guess I'll be the one to mention Avaz because it's on me. So the Avaz is a hierarchical language system, in some ways similar to like a TouchChat or a Perlo. One big difference is that there's a lot of parent training embedded, and we have, I think, 17 languages, so that's pretty cool. There's a bunch more. Who wants to jump in?
You mentioned a lot of them. I think that when you're figuring out what apps to trial, I mean, there's so many things that go into it. Like, it's a clinical decision. So, one thing I look at is, does this child have issues with motor planning? And if they do, then I'm more inclined to pick a system like LAMP or Speak for Yourself that really, really drives home the motor planning issue or the motor planning piece. With that being said, I feel like all these apps are coming out with updates that support motor planning. So like Proloquo now has progressive language, which supports motor planning. So, and a lot of them can be programmed to support the motor planning piece. So I'm trying to think of, Android, for Android users, Cough Drop is a really great Android app. Actually, and another great feature of Cough Drop is they connect with Google Translate. I found this out when I was doing a training in Cambodia, and they were like, we don't have any AAC systems here. We barely have speech therapy. So it's nice because Cough Drop will connect with any language through Google Translate. So if you have a user that has kind of an obscure language, you can't find an app to support, Cough Drop is a really good example.
And the cost is nice too.
Yes.
So I'm going to flip the question a little bit, because the way the question is asked makes it sound like the way you should do an AAC evaluation is you bring in your iPad with 9 different apps on them and try them all. And I think that is not necessarily the best way to approach an AAC evaluation. I think maybe the better way to approach an AAC evaluation is to observe the student and maybe try to see what they can target, but then really, again, meet with a team and say, what does this student need? And so picture it, if you would, a chart, even a table that has the first column of the table is a list of everything the student needs. And then along the top, in the different columns next to that, would be the different apps that might meet those needs. And then you fill out the chart and you see which app meets most of those needs. And in all of those cases, I think what happens many times is that people find just what Rachel was saying, like, well, 3 of these hit all of those things the student needs. So now what do we do? How do we pick which one out of all these apps? Because they're all robust and they could all work to help the student. So in that case, I think 2 factors are considered. One is you got to ask yourself the question, what is going to be the least restrictive option for the student? When you're looking at the different options in your chart, which one of all of those, with all the different factors, restricts the student the least? And one of those factors might be, this goes to the point Lucas made, what do the other people in the environment know? Which doesn't necessarily mean that makes it the best app, but it might be the best app for the student under the circumstances, because if everyone in the school district seems to know Lamp Words for Life or seems to know Cough Drop, then that is something to consider, because if the speech therapist decides to leave and next year they get a new speech therapist, well, what happens is the whole thing crashed because the speech therapist really knew Prolo Quo and they thought it was the best app for the student and no one else ever bought into it. So by making it a team approach that's making the decision, everyone has ownership, and by using something that people are familiar with, that might be a huge consideration in what's best for the student. So I just don't want people to walk away going, well, I got to know every single app that's on the market. I got to try them all. Plus, I have some concerns just with the idea of trialing in the first place, because if I try Prolo Quo first, and we've said over the last hour that motor planning seems to be a consideration that we should be looking at even more closely. If I try Prolo Quo first, how long do I try it for? 2 weeks? 3 weeks? Am I modeling all that time? And then how did I make that decision? Do I just take it away and then give another app for a while? And wouldn't the student do better on the first app because I've been teaching it for 3 weeks? It'd be like asking me to learn Spanish for 3 weeks and then giving me French for another 3 weeks and saying, which one do you do better on? Well, I'm going to do better on Spanish because I already practiced that first. So I think there's more considerations there that traditionally we haven't looked at, but the more we ask these questions, the better we all become at kind of figuring it out.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I like how you said put that on its head, because I think that when we are talking to our school districts and we want to put together an evaluation team, they want to know what apps do you need. And it's a whole different way of thinking about it. I can see you thinking, Luke.
Oh, there's some really great comments going on in the chat here. And so we'll address what we can, but one thing that comes to me too is just student preference. I mean, I've had students just pick up an app and just like it right away, and sometimes I don't even know the reason really, it's like, okay, sure. But I'm strengths based in my practice. So, I mean, if that's what the child's gravitating towards, then I'll go for it. And, I'm referring to pediatric, right? So geriatric's a whole other piece we're not really addressing.
That actually you took the words right out of my mouth, Lucas. Yes. I often I'll ask kids, like, which one, I'll do a preference assessment after we do some trials. And, sometimes kids don't respond, depending on their skill level. But I've had, some kids that they will tell me, I'm like, which one did you like better? This one or this one? And they'll, either point or, like Lucas said, they'll gravitate towards one. So I think that, we need to remember to kind of include the actual child in this decision, and if it's possible.
Oh, let me throw in one other thing. Oftentimes AAC evaluations aren't just at the initial stage, meaning we've been talking about it like as it's the first time someone's ever seen an app. But what happens, I think, pretty frequently is 3 years in, a student may have plateaued for some reason. And so now we're doing a second AT or AAC assessment to try and figure it out. And in those cases, I often wonder, shouldn't we be sticking it out longer with whatever the first app was? Because it takes so darn long to learn. I often equate it to, like, it's not a marathon, it's an ultra marathon, 50 marathons, That's how long it takes for students to continue to see growth, because it's grow and plateau and grow and plateau and grow and plateau. So stick with it before you just kind of change things up on students. I think that should be a big consideration.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask the 4 questions that are actually in the Q&A, and then we will sum up the course, and then we'll go to the chat questions, Luke. And then also to let you know that we will be downloading the chat and uploading it back into the course, so you should be able to see a copy of all of that's been going on the side there. They were asking for a link to the chat. I'm actually going to put that screen back up. And then also we are going to be uploading the final versions of this. So you will be able to print it out again if you want to do that, or you'll be able to just see it, on the PDF. Okay, this one's for Chris from Joan, and it says, you mentioned a team making decisions about devices. Who should be on the team? It's a great question.
Well, okay, let's go. Speech language pathologist, any related service staff that's working with the student if possible, and then, I don't know, maybe the parent might be a good person to have on that committee, and maybe an administrator. So I'm saying maybe, but those are the people that should be there. And of course, the case manager or the teacher. Those would be all the people that you'd want to have there, and then anyone else that's interested.
Great.
Yeah,
okay,
OT, ATP if necessary, right? Depending on access, but sure. Yeah, good.
Okay, another good question. For language representation, what part does cognitive ability factor in with the use of devices to communicate? So cognitive and physical.
I can jump in on that. Cut you off. Just based on, I just want to pair what Chris said earlier. I really like the, we got to think about the presumption of competence, right? So I've been in totally that situation so many times where I've been like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what the level of cognitive complexity that's appropriate here. Or, I mean, you could replace cognitive complexity with anything. It could be vision impairment. It could be whatever. And what I always do is try to start a couple ticks above what my gut says, right? And then work back down, right, as necessary, or work up, but I have been fooled by my gut on cognitive complexity way too many times for me to get burned again. I'm just going to always presume.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, along with that, if you believe children are capable, they rise to the challenge. So, if you believe that they can't do it, then they'll never do it because they never have the opportunity. So I think we just really need to start from a place of, presuming that they can and giving them systems that will support them. Because like Lucas mentioned, I've just been blown away so many times, and it's like no more will I have to feel this sense of guilt for not assuming that a child was capable, or not speaking up during a team meeting when I felt like we were giving a system that might not have been as robust as I think it should have been. I just think we really that's our role, is to inspire people to believe that it's possible.
If you're going to fail swinging for the stars, right? Mm-hmm. Don't fail because you cut someone short. Right? I've heard this before. It's this simple, well, that system's way too complicated for a student. What? How do you know that? Right? Where are you coming up with that sort of evidence or data? Just presume you can do it.
Yeah, and a lot of the preconceptions that people might come to the table with are maybe false, right? So we talk a lot about, on the podcast even, about, one disadvantage that often clinicians have is that we don't have access to the naturalistic environment of the home or whatever it might be, or a school clinician I'm thinking of specifically. But one thing we do have access to, which maybe they don't at home, is communicative temptation, right? Because we're not mind readers the way their parents might be. And so we get to see them fresh and in an environment where they probably really want to say something to us,
Fantastic. Okay, so that is the end of this course. We want to thank you for joining us for the Special Apps Update 2018 conference. This conference is sponsored by Smarty Ears, and this course was sponsored by the Center for AAC and Autism. Again, please come and talk to us more about this in the forum. So if you go to Exceptional Ed and go into your profile, there'll be a forum there where you can continue the conversation. And thank you for joining us tonight.
You're listening to the Exceptional Podcast Network.